Hey there, guys. This is Sarah Nicole Nadler. Welcome back. This week, we're going to be talking about some really cool tools that I use to help really build a strong company culture. So for those of you who don't know, I ran a 3-day workshop last week around hiring. So I figured this is a good next step for those of you who maybe hired somebody last week or who have been hiring recently. Sort of, okay, great, I hired them, now what? Right? So this is the now what training. For those of you who maybe already have a company culture that you're not really happy with, or you have a team and you're thinking about firing somebody, or you are just not generally happy with the core values of the team you have, this is a perfect training for you. So stick around. For those of you who are interested in learning more about what I'm going to be talking about today, I do have a freebie that goes along with this training. It's called the Employee Behavior Blueprint. For those of you who are on Instagram, I'm kind of streaming in 2 places today, guys, so bear with me. But you guys can download this. Go ahead and just drop in the chat the word culture, and my team or I will make sure that you get a copy of this workbook. So let's dive in. The 5 tools that I use the most as sort of my go-to tools when an employer, a company owner, is not happy with the culture of their business. Okay, so this is when we have things like office politics going on, toxicity, employees, talking back, not really doing what you ask them to do, not meeting expectations, things like that. These are my go-to tools, okay? So the first one is implementing the right office policies and enforcing them. So I talked a little bit about this earlier today on a Facebook post. You guys can feel free to check that out if you want. But this right here inside the guide is the biggest, most important tool that I implement first. Anytime I have a company that is getting into office politics, there's gossip going on, there's toxicity, stuff like that. And the business owner's just kind of like tearing their hair out going, what do I do? It seems like it's coming from everywhere. Usually when we implement this strategy, things start to settle out, and it either becomes obvious that it was just one employee all along and they're toxic and we need to get rid of them, or everybody kind of settles down and it starts to kind of run smoothly again. Okay, so the first policy that we implement is usually this one. It says, all communication should be cheerful. Despite what is going on with you on a personal basis, you should always appear professional, enthusiastic, and caring. If you cannot do so at any given time, make arrangements with your supervisor to have your job covered until you can. So just what we do, the very first step, right, is we issue that as a company policy on your letterhead or whatever your normal company policy strategy is, right? Maybe you email it out to people, etc. But we want every employee to sign their agreement and understanding of that policy and send it back to HR or back to you if you're the small business owner, right? So first thing we're going to do is just get everybody's agreement that that is a worthwhile company policy and we're all going to agree to sign it, right? Now that it's been signed and it's been put in writing, it's now a company policy and we can enforce it, right? It's hard to enforce policies that are verbal. So we really want to get this in writing, and ideally everybody signs it. Once that's done, we can move on to the next step, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But before I do, I want to make one point about this policy. I mentioned appearing professional, enthusiastic, and caring, right? If you cannot do so at any time, get your position covered until you can. This is not to say that like people always have to be perfect all the time. Like I'm not enthusiastic about my business all the time, right? Like it's okay to have a mental health day. It's okay to sometimes need a break, right? Especially, I've had employees who just need to go take 10. They go to a smoke break, they come back, they're in a better frame of mind. They're ready to get back to work despite what was going on, right? I've had people call in because they have a family member in the hospital or something's happening with their child or, right? There's life happens. And we need to have guidelines in the business that tell employees what to do when shit happens in life. Okay, excuse my French. But this is important, guys. Like we need to actually make sure that employees know what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. And we create some kind of group agreement around this key point. Otherwise, you have people acting out, handling situations very differently. Some of them are totally cool all the time and they're very professional. They always tell you when something's up. Others just like ghost you, don't show up for work, and then tell you later, like, well, you should be compassionate. You know what I mean? And so the reason why all of that chaos happens is because there wasn't an agreement in the first place of how these matters should be handled. So that's what we're giving people, is we're giving them a stable, reference point from which to launch off and go, okay, now I know where the guardrails are in the road, and I know what is and is not acceptable behavior when things go wrong. We don't only want to give employees, examples of what to do when everything's going right, because that's just not realistic, right? Like, we can talk all the time about the ideal scene, how it should be in the business, an ideal day and things like that. And that's important. They have to be able to see the ideal in order to be able to reach it, right? They have to know what the expectation is in order to meet it. But we also need to give them guidelines of what to do when things go wrong and they don't know what to do, okay? So that's a very important company policy. Now, I'm going to talk in a minute about how we enforce company policy, but suffice to say, there has to be something in writing first. My second tool that I reach for when things are not going well, and there's, again, office politics, there's toxicity, there's people kind of getting backflashy or talking back at their supervisor or not complying with directions and not meeting expectations, right? The second tool I reach for is actually just improving the employees' communication skills. Now, again, for those of you who are on Instagram right now, you might want to hop over to Facebook for this part, because I'm going to be sharing my screen and really giving you guys some awesome training right now for free. So definitely check out Facebook if you're watching this live and you want to check this out. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Let's take a look at the formula for good communication. The reason why I found this is so vital is because communication is really not taught much in school. If you think about it, when did you get taught how to communicate well, right? Maybe in debate class a little bit, they talked about it, but really all they did was make you good at arguing, right? Not necessarily good at rational, sane conversation or how to act professionally. Like, there wasn't a class that I took in school that taught me how to act professionally, right? Like, that would have been amazing. I feel like that would have been life-changing. But unfortunately, they just don't teach these things. They don't teach the communication formula. So the communication formula is very simple. It starts with A, trying to come up with an idea, or not trying, coming up with an idea of what they want to communicate to B. So you have point A is the source of communication. Point B is the effect. They're the place we're trying to arrive our communication to, right? So the very first ingredient here of communication is actually intention. Okay, you have to intend to communicate something. The second ingredient of communication is attention. So A has to have intention to reach B. B has to have their attention on A. So A has a responsibility there to get B's attention, right? How many times have we had communication that went nowhere, right? You go live on Facebook, nobody shows up. What are some other examples? You send out an email and nobody responds, right? Like, you didn't get their attention. That's the very first step. So in a business, when we have, catty kind of nasty communication going back and forth between employees or between employees and management, et cetera, usually these basic ingredients are what's missing. A did not intend for B to actually enjoy that communication. They said it kind of in a nasty way, and so they got a nasty response, right? That's part of intention. Then there is the communication going across to B. B needs to do two things now, okay? They need to duplicate and understand. These are not the same thing. When I was growing up, I used to think duplication and understanding were the same thing, but they're not. Duplicate means, can you repeat it back? Okay. If duplicate can also mean, if you're giving a direction, you're giving an order to a junior, it can mean, can you actually comply without alteration? Okay. So if A is a boss and B is an employee, A says, B, go get me that pen and bring it over here. B could do all kinds of weird things that do not involve duplication, right? Like, let's come up with some examples. If you're in the chat, go ahead and drop some examples of lack of duplication that you've seen. I'll give you some that I've seen. I tell B, go bring that pen and bring it here. B picks up the pen and brings it to the bathroom. Picks up the pen and puts it on a different desk. Picks up the pen and, to be helpful, puts it on my desk so they won't disturb me. Not what I asked them to do, right? Might have been perfectly intended to be helpful, but it was still not duplication. Or B never even picks up the pen at all, right? These are all examples of failing to duplicate the command, failing to do exactly what was said without alteration, right? So B has to have their attention on A, duplicate what was communicated, and also understand. So understanding, again, is the responsibility of A just as much as it's the responsibility of B. B needs to clarify if they don't understand, but A needs to be understandable. So a great example of this is, I told this story a couple of weeks ago at one of our workshops. A captain comes to his crew and says, everybody, I need you to clean the decks and gather up all of the fire extinguishers and get that boat out of the water, and then walks away. And all the sailors, they all have stuff to do already, right? So they go, well, all right, I guess we'll get around to that, and kind of lazily throughout the day get a few of those things done. And then the captain comes back and he's like, why aren't these things done, Ron? And he gets all mad. But was he actually being understandable in his order? Well, if he had come instead and said, I need this place spick and span because the admiral is coming at 3 p.m. Okay, now they can prioritize. Now they understand the importance of the order so they can comply with all urgency required, right? Or I need everybody to gather up the fire extinguishers because we're having a fire inspection at 1 p.m. and I want everything to be perfect so we can still have permission to operate as a ship, right? So like now they understand the order because you are understandable. So a lot of failures to comply come not from employees being unwilling to do, but from poor leadership. Let me repeat that. A lot of failures to comply, non-compliance, right, come not from unwillingness on the part of the employee, but from poor leadership. We're not giving them an order that's understandable. We're not giving them the work that they need to do their job. Here's a great example. Thank you so much for sharing this. I need a phone call made to find out X info. When they call, they get lots of information except for what I asked. Yeah. So like I said, it's on both sides, right? You obviously gave them all the information they needed in this case to do their job, and they simply didn't duplicate or didn't understand, and they failed to clarify with you if there was something they misunderstood, right? That's on them when they fail to clarify. It's on you when you are not understandable. So it's a two-way street when it comes to communication, right? Great example. Okay, so there's duplication, understanding. There's another piece to this, however, for us to have fully good communication. To really be able to say this is good communication, this piece has to be in place as well. This is called an acknowledgement. Okay, so the acknowledgement is the responsibility of B. B needs to say, yes, I heard and understood you. Hey guys, for those of you who are on Instagram right now, I just want to let you know I'm doing a training. Okay, it's awesome, but it's over on Facebook. So if you want to actually see my screen, you'll want to jump over to Facebook. If you want to stay here and just kind of tune in with half an ear, that's totally fine too. But if you're really buying into this training and you'd love to see more, jump over to Facebook so you can see my screen. If you have any questions, make sure you drop them in the chat. Okay, so we're talking about this communication formula. A intends to get a communication across to B. B has their attention on A. A is the boss, B is the employee in this example, right? B has to duplicate that communication, meaning comply without alteration. They have to understand, which sometimes means asking clarifying questions. A has a responsibility to be understandable and to be duplicatable, right? And then B has to acknowledge. If anything goes wrong with that formula, we have catfights between employees. We have management hates employees and employees hate management, right? Like we have all of this chaos simply because this formula is violated. For those of you who want to learn more about this, I actually have a $17 training called HR Superstar Masterclass. Go ahead and comment the word superstar below, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that training. It's 17 bucks, okay? Really easy peasy. But the cool thing about this is actually a training that I learned inside a course called Communication for Business Owners. And it's taught by Hubbard. Well, it was created and designed by Hubbard. He's not around anymore, so he doesn't teach it, right? But I can teach it to you, and it includes drills that teach you how to get good at all of these things. Because like I said, this is a skill that's learned. It's not something that you're just born with most of the time. There are a few people out there who are natural communicators, and they're amazing. But for the rest of us, we actually need to drill this and get good at it, right? So if you're interested in learning those drills, go ahead and sign up for HR Superstar Masterclass, okay? So that was number two skill or tool that I reach for, right, when we have company culture issues. The third tool that I reach for then is, does the business owner know the difference between correcting an employee and disciplining an employee? There's a big difference, but it's very simple to understand, okay? And the bottom line of the difference between these two is, was the employee willing to do it? Okay, that's it. That's the only difference. A to B, black and white. Was the employee willing to do the thing that was ordered? If the employee did it because they did not comply, because they're completely unwilling, they're lazy, they don't feel like it, they were too busy on Facebook or playing with their hair or doing something weird, then we discipline the employee, okay? Because discipline's purpose is to raise willingness. When it's done correctly, it raises willingness. It does not squash willingness. And we'll talk about that next. If the employee was perfectly willing to, but couldn't, then we correct the employee. And correction can take a lot of different, methods, but it can include finding out what words they didn't understand, figuring out the training that needs to be done with them so that they acquire the skills that they can, unburdening them. Sometimes they're just overwhelmed. You give them too much to do. So of course they didn't get it all done, right? They're still human. So that's correction. We either correct them, we correct the product they're creating if it's faulty, we correct the organization or the time management of the employee, right? That's correction. It's not disciplinary. It does not make the person wrong. It does not make them feel like squashed, right? If someone's feeling squashed at the end of your correction, you're doing something wrong, and that's bad leadership. That's not poor employee behavior, okay? So we have to be able to differentiate this one thing. When you get non-compliance, when you're telling them, like, remember I talked about earlier, you put in that policy, all communication should be cheerful. If you're getting non-compliance to that order and people are being catty with each other, there's office politics going on, find out whether the people involved were either A, unwilling to comply with that, or B, unable to. They don't have the communication skills necessary to communicate to each other properly, and so they constantly get frustrated with each other. Good, we just need further training on communication formula, right? Or are they unwilling to be nice to each other? Okay, well, in that case, there is gonna have to be a disciplinary matter because that's the only thing that will fix that, okay? So that's rule number 3, or tool number 3 that I reach for when there's poor company culture going on, is I determine, are they unwilling or not, right? Number 4, if you are getting resistance to the order, if you're telling your employee to do something, if you're setting a quota, if you're setting an expectation, if you're implementing the guidelines, right, and trying to get them to be nice to each other and nice to you and treat your clients with respect, etc., right, and you're getting resistance to this, then we know we need to discipline, right? But wait, there could be actually 3 reasons why that's going on. So again, does the business owner or does the manager, does the HR manager know how to determine which of these 3 is going on? I mentioned them before, I'm going to say them again. 1, if you're getting resistance, right? 1, they're either overwhelmed. You've given them too much to do. And so of course they're resisting. Like, that's a completely natural reaction to having too much to do. You will then resist having more given to you, right? If that's going on, again, it's poor leadership. It's poor organization of the business. That's what needs to be handled, right? 2, they could be unskilled in that area. Like, you could tell them to get something done. They're not trained on how to do it. So they fumble it. They mess it up. They alter it. They fail to do it at all. They, kind of reluctantly won't get started. It's because they don't know how, okay? Disciplining them will not fix that, right? Disciplining the overwhelmed person squashes them. It makes them feel completely overwhelmed. They'll usually go into tears or get frustrated, yell, throw things. They're overwhelmed and you just made it worse, right? That's poor leadership. Number 3, they're actually unwilling. They have some kind of disciplinary issue. They said that they would do it, but they're not. And it's not for any reason other than the fact that they were too busy doing something else. I call it having other fish to fry, right? If I'm paying you to fry this fish and you're over here frying your own fish, right? So you can eat later instead of frying the fish of the customers, right? That's a problem. That's a disciplinary issue. So we have to be able to determine which of these 3 issues are going on in order to fix it. Because if we apply the wrong solution to those 3, we're not going to get a good outcome. So oftentimes I see business owners, they are getting frustrated and trying to discipline their employees or ethically correct them, right? when really it's actually just to make the business owner feel better about having yelled, right? That is poor leadership. It really, truly is. There's no other word for that, right? What we want is to actually be effective. And what's effective is to determine which of those 3 reasons it is, and then apply the right tool. All right, the last tool I reach for is learning how to discipline correctly. So through all of this, let's say you really have trained the person correctly, you gave the order in the correct way, meaning you were understandable, right? You gave them the opportunity to clarify the order, you trained them, they know what they're doing, and they're still not getting it done. They're still not meeting expectations. Now, and we've determined, right, that they're simply unwilling to do for whatever reason, either covertly or overtly, right? They're unwilling to get it done, unwilling to do what's necessary to hit that expectation that you've set. Now we're going to discipline them, but we're going to do it in a way that does not squash the person, right? And that actually gets results. So the first thing you have to realize is that internally in most people, there are urges to do wrong, right? Like you're supposed to be getting from A to B, and then you have this urge to go off and hang out with your friends, or you have this urge to go on Facebook and fiddle around with your phone for hours, or you have urges, right? People have urges to do wrong sometimes. And the only purpose for disciplining them is to make the external pressure to do right be greater than the internal pressure to do wrong. If we overshoot the mark, excuse me, I just fluffed my hair all over the place. There we go. If we overshoot the mark, we squash the person. If we undershoot the mark, their internal pressure to do wrong is still greater than our external pressure for them to do right. And so they'll just keep doing the wrong thing, right? So we have to take this on a gradient until we find that perfect level of pressure that encourages them to do the right thing, which is meet expectations, get their job done, not be catty, not be office politics, or whatever it is we're trying to change behavior, right? Whatever behavior we're trying to change. So let me show you how we do this, okay? This is called ethics gradients. And again, wonderful training. I teach a lot more about it. If you guys are interested in the inner circle, you'll learn all about this. So I call it taking baby steps up the stairs. If you just jumped on, I just want to let you guys know I'm over on Facebook doing this training as well. And over there, you can see my screen. So if you guys want to hop over to Facebook, you can learn all about this and see my screen. If you're just tuning in with one ear and you kind of want to just listen, that's totally fine. If you have questions, say hi. I'm going to wave at some of you guys. Hello, hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining. But we're talking about how to discipline employees correctly in a way that doesn't squash them, but also causes change of behavior, okay? So I call this baby steps up the stairs. So imagine you're taking stairs up to the second floor. At the second floor is firing the person, okay? So here we are at the bottom. The first thing to know is that disciplining only works if both the employee and you know that you are fully willing to arrive at the second floor. If you're not willing to fire this person and they can detect that, usually no amount of disciplining is actually going to change their mind because they know it's an empty threat. So don't have empty threats. It's useless and it causes chaos. It causes people to feel weird and it's just not a cool thing to do. So instead, just decide that this is actually something that if continued is destructive to the company and you're willing to fire them if it doesn't knock off, okay? And we're gonna give them, depending on what it is, we're gonna give them either a ton of chances to change or only 1 or 2 or none. Depends on what it is. If it's something like theft or fraud, of course, we're not going to give them any chances to change. We're simply going to fire them, right? If it's something more along the lines of like being late or, you know, maybe engaging in some office politics, which is against company policy, okay, we might give them multiple chances. In my experience, the best way to choose is either 1, is this something that could put my company or my clients truly at risk, either legally or safety reasons? If it's something that's going to put the whole company at risk or something that's going to put clients' lives or privacy at risk, I'm usually a little bit more stern and give less chances. If it's something that's just irritating to me personally or setting kind of a bad example for my team, I usually am a little bit more lenient if the employee is a good employee and otherwise has some redeeming traits, okay? So that's just my personal opinion. You guys can make up your own mind about that. But at the end of the day, We have to have as many baby steps up the staircase as possible, because if you only have one or two, then every time you start up that staircase, you end up having to fire the person when you didn't want to. Okay, so that's the other aspect, is you have to have enough of these that you can actually keep moving up the staircase. Because one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a business owner is to stick on the same level. Okay, if you see on my screen here, if let's say someone is late and I tell them, hey, don't be late, that's a verbal warning, right? And then the next time they're late, I just do it again. Don't be late. Hey, don't be late. Hey, don't be late. Don't be late. I'm a broken record. And if that didn't fix it the first time, it's not going to fix it the second. Okay. You have to continuously move up the stairs towards the second floor in order for remember, we're trying to be greater pressure to do right than they had external pressure to do wrong. So if the first amount of pressure you applied was not enough, failing to add more pressure is not going to fix it, right? Because they have more external pressure to do wrong than you exerted for them to do right. So after a verbal warning, maybe I'll be a little bit more stern with my verbal warning. Like maybe the first time it was sort of here, I'll share my face so you guys can see how I do this, right? Maybe the first time they're late, I'm going to say something like, hey, I really would appreciate it if you weren't late. Okay, that's pretty kind, maybe a little bit stern, but not going to overwhelm anybody, right? Maybe the second time they're late, I go, hey, not cool being late again, right? So now I'm increasing the consequence by increasing the intensity of my communication. Now, I personally do not go in for yelling, cussing, getting like nasty with employees. I just don't think that's necessary. That's not how I want to run my business. That's not how I would want to be treated if I were an employee. I'm going to, in fact, this person has a perfect example. The next step I'm going to do is probably documenting the warning. Okay. And instead of doing verbal, I'm going to do a written warning, meaning I'm going to write up what they did wrong, put a date on it, sign it myself, and ask them to sign it. The fact that I'm making them sign this document that they know is going to be on their record, their personnel record, is an increase in that gradient, right? So these are examples of things you can do without having to suddenly go from one warning to fire, right? For something like lateness, if that's not affecting a client and it's just irritating to me, I usually will not fire for that. It depends though, right? If this person's opening the business and there's clients waiting, yeah, 1 or 2 times is probably enough warnings for me and I will fire at that point. But again, we're getting into details here where you guys are just gonna have to make your own decision, right? Yeah, here's another good one. I need you here at the start of your shift, ready to work. That is a more direct communication. It's a little bit less friendly, right? And it's a higher gradient of discipline than saying, hey, please don't play it again, right? Like that's down here. Being more direct, getting a little bit more eye contact, right? Like that's a little higher. After that, as the other person stated, right, we have documenting the warning, right? So providing documentation. I also use things like having them reread the policy because my company policy tells them why. Remember, we want the order to be understandable, right? So why do I want you to be on time? Making sure they can see the full effect their actions are having, the full consequences of those activities. That way, again, it increases that pressure because all we're trying to do, we're not trying to make people wrong. We're not trying to squash them. We're just trying to make it so that their internal pressure to do wrong is smaller than the external pressure to do right. That's all we're trying to do, right? So after written warning, maybe even multiple written warnings, right? Maybe I give them 2 or 3. Then sometimes I'll have what I call the come to Jesus moment. And this is where I start to verbally threaten their job. And I say, look, we've had this discussion multiple times. I'm totally willing to hear you out if there's some extenuating circumstances this time, right? One rule I always have when disciplining is listen before you decide you're outraged, because maybe there is a pattern of behavior, but the one time you decide to get annoyed about it, the person was like, actually, my dog was dying. And you're like, okay, well, actually, that's extenuating circumstances. You know what I mean? So it's always good to listen before you decide you're outraged. But let's say it's been multiple times. I've done documentation, etc. I'm going to sit this person down and go, look, what's going on in your life that you cannot control this one simple thing? Is this an issue you've had in the past? You know what I mean? And like try to actually help them. That meeting is my attempt to help them. And at the end or somewhere within that meeting, I'll usually say, look, if this doesn't change, I can't have you as part of this team. So I'm having this meeting to help you fix this pattern you have in your life, because if it doesn't change, I am actually going to let you go. So there is a threat, a verbal threat there, but it's not nasty, right? You don't need to get nasty with employees. You just need to either correct their behavior or fire them, right? Getting nasty with people is usually quite ineffectual, actually. They may do what you ask them to do, but now they're doing it out of fear. And fearful people are not always very honest. They're usually very poor communicators. Fearful people are usually quite ineffectual. So driving people into fear does not actually build your company. So I'd rather just fire that person at that point, right? But I'm going to have my come to Jesus moment with them. I'm going to try to help them. I'm going to sit down with them and maybe even like give suggestions and try to get them to interact with me and engage and show how they're willing to change. That's all we're doing with this, is just trying to cause willingness to change. Now, one thing to be aware of when you're doing this is there can be a lot of legal ramifications for letting somebody go, right? Especially for things if you're only letting them go because the thing they're doing is annoying to you. That can kind of be borderline discriminatory in some cases, right? So we want to make sure that we're talking to a lawyer and being very in cahoots, that's a bad word for that, being very in touch with what that person's workers' rights are. You guys know I'm really big on workers' rights, on human rights in general. We want to respect our workers' rights very, very much. So make sure that you have a lawyer who you're discussing these with, especially when you start moving up towards that second floor and getting ready to actually fire the person. Just everything's documented, there's witnesses, things like that, okay? But above that, after my come to Jesus conversation, if they continue an unchanging pattern, at that point, I just fire them and find somebody else. Because holding on to someone like that who has an unchanging pattern of negative behavior, after that many warnings, usually at that point, they're going to need tools applied to them that are not typically available in a business. So good, let them go find a position that either is more within their purpose line, and so they're more willing to do it, or is more within their capability, so they're more capable of doing it, or they're just gonna take that being fired as a wake-up call and they're going to go actually start out their life, right? So I never feel guilty for firing somebody at that stage. If I know I've done everything I could, including my disciplinary levels, and I've treated them the way I would want to be treated, right? Good old golden rule. At that point, I know I'm doing this employee a favor by firing them, because if they stick around, they're going to be miserable. And so am I, and so is my team. And they're going to know they're causing misery, and that's going to make them feel guilty and unhappy, and they will react even more. And usually it gets nasty at that point. So just don't be so scared of firing people that we don't let people go when it's the right moment. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on live with me today, you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. If you do want to grab the employee behavior blueprint, like I said, make sure you comment the word culture down in the chat, and my team or I will reach out to you and get you a copy of this. And for those of you who are interested in working with me one-on-one to build a dream team for your business, I highly recommend you jump inside the Inner Circle coaching program. I have a very special offer going on with that right now. So if you're interested, go ahead and comment Inner Circle below, and I'll make sure you get a link to that too, okay? Thank you so much. I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.